Jean Paul Paloméros is a former French Air Force Chief of Staff and former Supreme Commander of NATO Allied Forces, joining me now. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. Let's talk more specifically about these Abrams tanks. What makes them so special?
Well, first and foremost, they are long-awaited tanks. The first announcements had been done months from now. Then it is the first version of the tank which is delivered to Ukraine, dated to 1980. So it's not the best Abrams tank in the inventory. It's quite heavy. It needs a lot of fuel, but nevertheless, it's another capability for Ukrainian, even if the number is quite reduced, 30. That won't make a big difference, but that will be helpful, if I may say so.
These tanks are also controversial. Why is that?
Well, it's controversial because they are very heavy. You cannot load the cannon with automatically, so you have to stop to put the munitions in the gun, etc. So there are limits. There are some fragility as well with the engine. So it's an heavy maintenance equipment. Nevertheless, it's powerful. It can use depleted uranium ammunition to really pierce the most heavy blindage. There is a plus-value, but it's still a little bit limited.
How do they compare to Russian tanks?
Well, at the time, it was very much compared to the latest tank. It depends on the variants. The latest variants, which weigh 72 tons, very heavy, are quite similar to the best Russian tank. But here we have the M1A1, which is the first produced. It's not so effective, less well protected than the new versions. So, but the Ukrainians must do with what they have, and they will fight with that. It's much better than nothing, and certainly than the old Soviet type of tanks they had so far.
Washington, as you mentioned, had promised to provide 31 Abrams tanks. That's part of more than $43 billion in security assistance that's been pledged by the U.S. since Moscow invaded in February last year. What other kind of weaponry could we see being delivered from the U.S.?
Oh, the outstanding question is about this Army tactical combat missiles, ATACMS, which are expected from Mr. Zelensky since at least the beginning of the war almost, because they have a range of around 300 kilometers. So, and they are very precise as well. It is the best long-range system in the Army, US Army inventory. So, and Mr. Biden and the US have been very reluctant to deliver that because obviously the Ukrainian can use that to strike in Russia, but they have not done that with other equipments. So really, ATACMS, as we say, are the most expected weapons now to be able to launch strikes against Crimea. I said it has been done last night.
Given this resistance you mentioned from the part of U.S. President Joe Biden, among others, do you think that we will see them delivered to Ukraine anytime soon?
Well, I hope so. I think so, because there has been discussions. So perhaps in small numbers initially, but that will still make a difference because we have no time for that. But the offensive is facing a huge resistance, even if there are some positive gains, and the Ukrainians desperately need means armament which are able to outreach the Russian and to be launched very precisely at long distance.
Jean-Paul, just to finish up, are you optimistic at all? Do you think the Ukrainians will get what they need to finally win this war?
Well, there is one thing they cannot get from the outside is the people. I think that will be, at the end of the day, the big factor. Is Mr. Zelensky able to regenerate his forces? It looks difficult. That could well be at the end of the day, if I may say so, on the long term, a showstopper.
Jean Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us. Jean Paul Paloméros there speaking to me.